Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Have you ever witnessed a moment so sharp, so piercing, and so brutally honest that it left an entire audience silent, almost gasping for air? Imagine this. A young American student stands up confidently thinking she's about to corner one of the world's most respected diplomats. She frames her question with arrogance, with the assumption that she knows the truth, with the belief that India's foreign minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, will stumble. But then, within seconds, the room shifts. What was meant to be a question becomes a setup for one of the most remarkable truth bombs ever dropped in international dialogue. This isn't just a story about one heated exchange. It's about something much bigger, about how power is shifting in the 21st century. It's about how nations once dismissed as developing are no longer willing to take lectures from the so-called superiors of the West. And most importantly, it's about how India, through the voice of Jaishankar, made it crystal clear the age of one-sided narratives is over. Now, before I unpack the moment that left the American girl stunned, let me set the scene. The event was a high-profile Q&A session in a U.S. university, a place where free speech thrives, where questions are encouraged, but also a place where the Western mindset often dominates, where students are groomed to think that their worldview is the only correct worldview. And into this arena walked Dr. Jaishankar, India's external affairs minister, known globally for his razor-sharp intellect, his calm composure, and his ability to reduce complex geopolitics into brutally simple truths. The American student, perhaps emboldened by the setting, asked a question that many in the West have whispered for years. It was laced with subtle condescension, framed in the language of human rights, global responsibility, and democratic values. On the surface, it seemed like a fair question. But if you read between the lines, it was not a question at all, it was an accusation. An accusation against India's policies, against India's alliances, and against India's choices in a turbulent world. And here's where the suspense builds. Because everyone in that hall expected Jaishankar to give a soft diplomatic answer, to play it safe, to sugarcoat his words as diplomats often do, but that's not who Jaishankar is. Instead, he leaned forward, adjusted his microphone, looked the student directly in the eyes, and dropped what I can only describe as a truth bomb, so powerful that the ripple effects are still being felt today. He said, "You don't get to sit thousands of miles away and lecture us on morality when your own record is written in wars, invasions, and double standards. You ask me why India chooses a certain path? Because we refuse to be the victims of someone else's history." The hall went silent. The confidence on the student's face melted into discomfort. Some people even clapped hesitantly at first, then with conviction. But that was just the beginning, because Jaishankar didn't stop with one sentence. He went further. He exposed the hypocrisy of the Western narrative. He pointed out how the United States lectures India on democracy while cozying up to regimes with far worse human rights records. He asked why wars waged in the Middle East, costing millions of innocent lives, are justified as freedom operations, while India defending its sovereignty is questioned. He reminded everyone that for decades the West used India as a pawn during the Cold War. But now when India has the audacity to stand tall and independent, suddenly the questions of values and morality appear. And then came the masterstroke, the part that really shut down the room. He said, "The era when a few nations could shape the rules of the world, when others had to follow silently, is over. This is not the 20th century anymore. India will do what is in India's interest, unapologetically." Now let's pause here. Do you realize the weight of those words? This wasn't just a response to one student, this was a declaration to the world. A declaration that India is no longer the soft-spoken, hesitant player on the global stage. India is now a force. And through leaders like Jaishankar, it is ready to speak the uncomfortable truths the world doesn't want to hear. But let's dig deeper. Why did this exchange matter so much? Why did this so-called truth bomb echo far beyond the walls of that university? It mattered because it exposed three critical realities. The myth of Western moral superiority. For decades, the West has positioned itself as the global moral compass. But Jaishankar flipped the script, showing that the very nations that preach morality are often the worst offenders when judged by the same standards. The rise of Indian confidence. India is no longer defensive. It no longer waits for approval. The way Jaishankar spoke was symbolic of a nation that knows its worth. It was the voice of 1.4 billion people saying, "We don't need validation. We define our own destiny." The shift in global power. This wasn't just about words. This was about geopolitics. The West knows it cannot ignore India, whether in trade, technology, or security. And Jaishankar made sure everyone knew that India will not play second fiddle. Friends, this moment went viral not because it was dramatic, but because it was authentic. People around the world, especially in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, saw in Jaishankar's words a reflection of their own struggles. They too are tired of lectures, tired of double standards, tired of being told what's right and wrong by nations that have blood on their hands. Let's not forget, America's foreign policy has been built on interventions from Vietnam to Iraq, from Afghanistan to Libya, and yet when India buys oil from Russia, suddenly it becomes a moral issue. When India strengthens its defense, suddenly it becomes a democratic concern. Do you see the hypocrisy? Jaishankar certainly did, and he called it out in real time. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The American girl probably thought she was asking a bold question. She didn't realize she was about to hand Jaishankar the perfect stage to dismantle decades of Western arrogance in less than 5 minutes. And let me tell you, this wasn't just about America versus India, it was about the world order itself. For centuries, the West has shaped narratives through media, through academia, through diplomacy. But in that one exchange, Jaishankar demonstrated that the world is waking up, that the colonized no longer need the colonizer's approval, that the lecture halls of Harvard, Princeton, or Georgetown do not define legitimacy for the rest of humanity. And if you think this was just a one-off event, you're wrong. Because Jaishankar has done this repeatedly. In interviews, in conferences and press meets, he has become the face of unapologetic Indian diplomacy. Think back to when he was asked about India buying Russian oil. His response, "My duty is to ensure the best deal for my people. If Europe can prioritize its energy security, so can India." Another truth bomb. Or when he was asked about Western criticism of India's democracy, his response, "We are not sitting in judgment of others, and we expect the same courtesy in return." Yet another truth bomb. Every time he speaks, the message is clear. India is no longer the subject of someone else's story. India is writing its own story. Now, before we move further, I want you to imagine the mindset of that American girl. After hearing Jaishankar's words, she came armed with what she thought was intellectual ammunition. But instead of weakening Jaishankar, she exposed her own shallow understanding of global affairs. That's the brutal truth bomb. The West's narrative no longer holds weight when challenged with facts, history, and unapologetic honesty. This brings me to an even more profound point. What Jaishankar did wasn't just diplomacy, it was psychological. He flipped the power dynamic in that room. Usually, students or journalists corner leaders with tough questions. But here, the leader cornered the questioner. The authority shifted, and once that shift happens, there's no going back. This is why I call it a defining moment. Not just for Jaishankar, not just for India, but for the entire global South. Because let's face it, countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America have long felt suffocated by Western narratives. They've been told how to govern, how to trade, how to speak, even how to think. But now they're finding their voice, and India, with its growing economic and strategic power, is leading that charge. So the question isn't whether Jaishankar shut down an American girl with a brutal truth bomb. The real question is, what does that tell us about the future of global politics? And more importantly, what does it mean for ordinary people like you and me? That's where things get truly fascinating. And in part 2, we'll dive into the ripple effects of this exchange, the lessons it holds for the West, and why Jaishankar's words will echo for decades to come. But before we wrap up this first part, let me leave you with one thought. When history is written, moments like this, small on the surface but seismic in impact, are often remembered as turning points. That day in that hall, with that question and that answer, the world saw the end of one era and the beginning of another. The era of lectures is over. The era of dialogue has begun. And India, through Jaishankar, is no longer asking for respect. It is demanding it. But friends, let's not stop at that single fiery exchange, because the truth is, Jaishankar's words that day were not just a response. They were a reflection of an entire philosophy, an entire strategy that India has been carefully shaping for years. To understand why this moment was so powerful, we need to zoom out and see the bigger picture. Think about it. For decades, international politics was dominated by a handful of countries. They decided who was right, who was wrong, who was democratic, who was authoritarian, who deserved sanctions, and who deserved support. They held the moral megaphone, and the rest of the world had no choice but to listen. But today, that balance of power is crumbling, and India is at the heart of this shift. When Jaishankar spoke, he wasn't just defending India. He was voicing the frustrations of dozens of nations who are tired of the double standards. Look at Africa, where Western powers extract resources for centuries and then suddenly talk about sustainability. Look at Latin America, where coups and interventions backed by foreign governments have left entire regions unstable, and yet they are still given lectures about governance. Look at the Middle East, where wars are fought in the name of democracy but leave behind chaos and broken societies. And then look at South Asia, where India has stood up scarred but resilient, refusing to bow down. The student probably thought she was representing the higher moral ground. But what she didn't realize was that her question was a mirror of the arrogance that the world is beginning to reject. And Jaishankar, with his brutal honesty, forced that mirror back into her face. Now let's break down some of the ripple effects of this moment. Because words may seem like just words, but in the world of geopolitics, they can move mountains. First, there's the psychological impact. Imagine you're a policymaker in Washington. You're used to Indian leaders politely nodding, carefully choosing words, trying not to offend. Suddenly, here's a man who doesn't just push back, he dismantles your entire argument in front of your own people. That changes perception. It forces respect, and in diplomacy, respect is everything. Second, there's the global impact. Clips of Jaishankar's exchange circulated across social media platforms. Millions watched, and among those millions were young people from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, who suddenly felt represented. They saw in his calm but firm response a reflection of their own resentment. They thought, finally, someone has the courage to say it out loud. That builds solidarity, that builds momentum. Third, there's the domestic impact inside India. Ordinary Indians saw their foreign minister standing tall, refusing to be lectured, refusing to play second fiddle. That boosts national pride. That tells every Indian citizen your voice matters, your country matters, you are no longer on the sidelines of history. But here's the real kicker. When Jaishankar speaks like this, he doesn't just talk back to the West, he redefines what diplomacy means in the modern world. For too long, diplomacy was seen as sugar-coated language, as endless compromise, as endless politeness. But Jaishankar has shown that diplomacy can be sharp, it can be blunt, and it can still be effective. In fact, sometimes blunt honesty is the most effective tool of all. And this is why leaders around the world are paying attention. Because Jaishankar has created a new model, what I would call assertive diplomacy, a model where you don't beg for acceptance, you don't defend endlessly, you don't apologize for your interests. Instead, you state your truth clearly, you back it with facts, and you stand by it unapologetically. That is the kind of diplomacy that resonates in today's multipolar world. Now let's come back to the brutal truth bomb itself. Because what made it so powerful was not just the words, it was the context. Think about the hypocrisy he exposed. The West criticizes India for buying Russian oil, but Europe itself continues buying gas from Moscow. The West criticizes India on democracy, but then shakes hands with regimes where opposition voices are crushed. The West criticizes India for defending its borders, but then justifies its own invasions as national security. Once you lay these contradictions bare, the entire narrative collapses. And that's exactly what Jaishankar did. He collapsed the narrative. He forced everyone in that hall and everyone watching online to confront a truth they didn't want to face. That the moral authority of the West is no longer unquestionable. Now imagine the silence in that hall. Imagine the discomfort on the student's face. Imagine the realization dawning on the audience that the old playbook no longer works. That was the power of the truth bomb. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. This wasn't an isolated event. Over and over again, Jaishankar has delivered these moments. Whether in Munich, in New York, in Delhi, or in interviews with Western journalists, he has been consistent, calm, precise, and devastatingly honest. And every time he makes it clear, India is not here to please anyone. India is here to pursue its interests, its values, its future. And this is why I say this was more than just a Q&A exchange. This was a signal of a broader global shift. The world is no longer unipolar. It is no longer dominated by one or two voices. It is multipolar, diverse, complex. And in this world, the West's monopoly on morality is gone. Friends, let me put it plainly. The American girl's question was not just answered. It was dismantled, destroyed, left in ashes. And in its place, Jaishankar built something new. A voice of confidence, a voice of independence, a voice that will guide India and perhaps much of the global South into the future. So what does all this mean for you and me? It means that we are living through a historical turning point. The rise of India is not just about economics, not just about technology, not just about population. It is about voice. It is about reclaiming dignity on the world stage. And Jaishankar's brutal truth bombs are part of that reclamation. This is why his words matter. This is why this exchange matters, because it tells every Indian, every Asian, every African, every citizen of the world, you do not have to accept double standards anymore. You do not have to bow down to false narratives. You can speak the truth. And when you do, the world will listen, even if it listens in silence, even if it listens uncomfortably. Now, as we approach the end of this story, let me take you to the bigger picture one last time. The American girl may have asked the question, but in reality, she represented something much larger. The arrogance of a system that believes it can never be questioned. And Jaishankar's answer was not just to her, it was to the entire system. It was a message: the days of lectures are gone. The age of dialogue has arrived. And make no mistake, this is just the beginning. Because as India grows stronger, as nations of the global south find their voice, more and more truth bombs will be dropped. And with every one of them, the world order will shift further away from dominance and closer to balance. So let me leave you with this. That day in that hall, something profound happened. An American girl asked a question, but what she got was not an answer. It was a revelation. A revelation that shook her assumptions, a revelation that echoed across continents, a revelation that will be remembered as one of the defining moments of modern diplomacy. And that revelation was simple. The truth cannot be monopolized. It can be silenced for a while, it can be twisted for a while, but eventually it breaks through, and when it does, it is unstoppable. That is what Jaishankar reminded the world. That is why his words hit like a brutal truth bomb. And that is why years from now, when people look back at the rise of India as a global power, they will remember not just the policies, not just the trade deals, not just the military growth. They will remember the words, they will remember the confidence. They will remember the day when India's voice silenced arrogance and declared loud and clear that the future belongs to those who speak the truth without fear. And with that, friends, we end this journey. But remember, this isn't the end of the story. It is only the beginning. Because as long as there are voices that try to dominate, there will be truth bombs to dismantle them. And as long as leaders like Jaishankar speak for nations that refuse to be silenced, the world will keep changing. One exchange, one truth, one brutal honesty at a time. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of this journey. Stay curious, stay informed, and never stop questioning the narratives you are told. Because somewhere out there, another truth bomb is waiting to be dropped.